Looking across Canada, the federal Liberal Party is in third place, and there are only 3 Liberal governments at the provincial level, and the one in Ontario, you could say, is in pretty rough shape. To help us examine whether there is room for the Liberal brand in Canadian politics today, we're joined in the nation's capital by L. Ian MacDonald, editor of Inside Policy, the magazine of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And here in studio, Martha Hall-Finley, Executive Fellow at the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary, and Greg Lyle, Managing Director with the Innovative Research Group. Great to have you two here in the studio. And Ian, nice to have you on the line from the nation's capital. You all just watched the Dalton McGuinty interview, and Ian, maybe I could get you to start. What jumped out at you?
Well, Steve, legacy management begins the moment a political actor leaves the stage, and in this case, I think it's been pretty messy so far. Proroguing the House, the legislature for an undetermined period of time because why? The government party's in a leadership race. There's the unraveling of the costs of the cancellation costs of these 2 power plants, and then any Ontario premier's legacy, Steve, begins with fiscal frameworks. And McGuinty's story, though there are extenuating circumstances, such as the appreciation of our dollar and the thickening of the border after 9/11 and the Great Recession of 2008-2009, the numbers don't tell a very happy story. He inherited a surplus of $117 million in 2003, with a net debt for Ontario of $138 billion, or 28% of GDP. As he leaves in 2013, Mr. Duncan has a deficit of $14 billion, with net debt of $258 billion, or 39% of GDP. And on Mr. McGuinty's watch, Ontario became a have-not province and is this year receiving $3.2 billion of equalization. And Ontarians just don't see themselves as a have-not province.
As I go to Martha Hall-Finley for her response, if the Premier were still here, he would say, not quite, Ian. I inherited a $5.6 billion deficit. He said that during the interview. You guys can quibble about the numbers, but that's what he'd say. Anyway, your reaction, Martha?
Yeah, I thought the interview was terrific. I think the Premier laid out very well what he feels he's accomplished. But I was most struck by his comment about how it's really hard to get in. It's also really hard to get out. And this was clearly a tough decision for him. Here's a premier, a Liberal premier. No Liberal has done a 3-term re-election in over a century in this province. That's a heck of an accomplishment in and of itself. But I'll be interested to have the discussion about what this means moving forward. My suspicion is that his decision is very much one that he saw as being the right thing for the future of the Liberal Party in Ontario, and kudos to him for doing that. And we're all looking forward to seeing what happens next. But I'm sure it was tough for him, but I think he certainly thought it was the right thing to do.
Greg.
Well, you have to wonder what would have happened if there were just a couple more seats in their column, and that had not been a major minority, right, but a full majority, and whether he'd still be here or whether he would have planned to move on as it stands out. But I think there's one thing that stood out for me in the interview is a sort of tension in McGuinty the person, right? On the one hand, he remained to the end, I think, an idealist, somebody who was excited about the challenge of finding problems and fixing problems and making things better. And I think it's very encouraging that you can be the premier for 9 years and all those years in opposition ahead and still at the end of it be excited about the job. But on the other hand, we saw the other side, the political calculations, the machinations, that side of his personality had sort of run out of steam, that the compromises have sort of piled up and added up to the point where they just couldn't be reconciled anymore. And the easiest way to save the party a lot of grief was to take the heat and let someone else take over.
Well, let's talk about where the Ontario Liberal Party is today. And to that effect, you've got some very fresh numbers out, right? These are as of now.
Yeah, finished last night.
Finished last night. Okay, let's bring these up if we can, because here's Dalton McGuinty's legacy. Admittedly, a poll is a snapshot of a moment in time. But at this moment in time, the Progressive Conservative Party, if an election were held today, would capture 23% of the vote. In second place would be the NDP with 22% of the vote. In third place, the Liberals, 21% of the vote. The Greens would clock in at 6%. And apparently there are 15% of the people out there who would still be open to persuasion from any or all of the above. Let's go on. How about, has Dalton McGuinty made things better or worse for Ontarians? And here's what Greg Lyle found on that. Better or a lot better, say 29%. No difference at all, 21%. Somewhat or a lot worse, 43%. And also, 4 in 10 say Ontario Liberal policies worked well or only need minor changes. That's from Greg Lyle's Innovative Research Group as of now. And Greg, follow up on that if you would. What's instructive for you?
Well, two things stand out. One thing that's really clear about the last decade is that there is less and less engagement with the two major parties in Ontario. And the numbers you showed are a great set of numbers to show because they included the undecided. We didn't factor them out. So you got a sense of, if we had shown this as decided vote, you would have seen the Tories at 34%. So you would think if you stop 100 people on the street, you'd find 34 that are Tory. You'd only find 23 because there's so many undecided and unaligned and all the rest of that. So that's actually a problem, I would argue, for the parties. That whatever they have done, what they have not been able to do is stay as connected as they were even 10 years ago with the average voter. And that has been part of the opportunity that the NDP's taken advantage of. As people feel less connected to their old mainstays, they've been more willing to adopt a second opportunity, or a third option. But the other thing that really stands out in that data for me is the number, how much change people are looking for. And if you took a look at that vote number again, you would see only 21% of Ontarians today say they would vote Liberal, but 42% say that the government only needs minor changes. So the Liberals can literally double their vote by delivering minor change, not major change. And I think that is one thing that McGuinty can be pretty proud of.
Let me go to Ian MacDonald in that. In your first answer, Ian, you gave I think it's fair to say, a fairly bleak representation of what you think the McGuinty legacy is in Ontario. After 9 years of Dalton McGuinty being in power, he's essentially tied with the other two parties. What does that tell you?
Tells you that Tim Udak has a problem. Going back to the campaign last year, Steve, when he made that unfortunate comment about foreign workers and allowed Mr. McGuinty to do as well as he did, finishing one seat short of a majority territory. But I think that Kitchener-Waterloo by-election was a bit of a tipping point because he went to a lot of trouble to appoint Elizabeth Whitmer to that board to create that vacancy. And then the Liberals went and finished third there. And in his interview with you just now, he sounded a little bit like Al Pacino in Godfather 3. Just when I thought I was getting out, they dragged me back in. His personal problems with disengaging. He's obviously done that now, but the Conservatives have a leadership problem with Tim Udak, and the Liberals, it's not clear who their next leader is going to be.
Martha Hall-Finley, what jumps out at you for the numbers?
Well, the contrast between what you described at the beginning of that point in time and what Greg has just said, how little it would take to actually move people. I think that's really striking. I'm really encouraged by that, by the way. And there are some terrific people who could take over the mantle. There's a great bench in Ontario right now. There's some excellent people. So it'll be very interesting. I think if Ontario gets a new really strong leader, and there's certainly lots of opportunity for that. You take Greg's analysis of what people are looking for, I think it actually bodes really well for the Liberal Party. I agree with Elian that the Conservatives have a challenge here.
So follow up on that as you look across the country right now, yes, the Liberals are ostensibly in power in 3 provinces out of 14 governments, right?
Well, they're not ostensibly, they are.
Well, no, because I don't know if you include British Columbia in that list, because they're really a Conservative party. They're a big L Liberal party, but they really are a Conservative party.
It's the old Social Credit Party.
Yeah. They're on shaky ground in Ontario.
It is an interesting
They're in power in Prince Edward Island, but kind of nowhere in Alberta, nowhere in Saskatchewan, not really anywhere in Manitoba, shaky in the Maritimes. So what's the Liberal brand, notwithstanding those numbers today?
Well, I will agree that in British Columbia it's harder to pin down. Just because we know that the Liberal Party is a mixture of Liberals and very much social credit reform Conservatives. And so it's very hard to pin that one down. And needless to say, Premier Clark has other challenges on her plate anyway. But this, I think, is really encouraging for the Ontario Liberal Party. I think what Greg said about the move, when we're referring to Kitchener-Waterloo, that there was a distancing between voters from the two traditional options, I think that's exactly what we've seen at the federal level. And I think the Liberal Party, the federal Liberal Party, it hurts me to say this because I am one, But I think that's exactly what's happened. And I think the federal Liberal Party has probably more work to do than any of those others that you've described. We're in a position now where I hope that we are able to do that. But there's no doubt in my mind that over time, the federal Liberal Party lost touch with a whole lot of what Canadians were looking for. And I think, Premier McGuinty said in the interview, although not exactly the same way, but when you try to be everything to everybody, at some point you stop really being anything to anybody. And I think, unfortunately, the federal Liberal Party spent a number of years, a whole lot of reasons. We don't have time to go into all the reasons behind this, but I think for a long time the Liberal Party was trying to be everything to everybody or trying not to offend too many people. And as a result, an awful lot of Canadians said, well, I don't really know what you stand for. I sure know what those people stand for, and I sure know what those people stand for. There's a lot to be said for having a party that says this is what we're going to do, even if you don't necessarily agree with everything they're going to do.
Ian, what does the Liberal brand look like to you?
Well, they benefit, Steve, in Ontario. We don't have checks and balances built into the Constitution, but in a certain sense they are built into the ballot box. And there is a tradition of blue in Ottawa, red at Queen's Park that we're seeing now. It used to be the other way around, of course, during the Davis years and the Big Blue Machine dynasty. But the Liberal brand, I agree with Martha that the Liberal brand federally is got a lot of rebuilding to do. Whoever wins this job, whether it's Mr. Trudeau or someone else, you have to ask the question of whether this is a prize worth having in the short term. Consider that the federal Liberal Party, from Sir Wilfrid Laurier's time down to the present day, that their dynasty was built on Ontario and Quebec, where during the Chrétien years they would win 100 seats in Ontario because of the divided right. They won 11 in 2011, and they even shut down the Leaders' Tour the last 5 days and had them put them on a bus and send them around the GTA. In Quebec, where they had 74 out of 75 seats as recently as 1980 in the pre-referendum election that returned Mr. Trudeau, they have 7 seats, or 8 with a crossover. So that of the 181 seats that are available in these two provinces, the Liberals now have exactly 18 or 19. And then if you go west, there's 92 seats from Manitoba to the west coast, and they've got 4. That's a huge rebuilding job, and you can't do it in one election. No one has ever gone from third to first place in one shot.
But I think Ian has exactly described one of the challenges is that because I think historically the Liberal Party federally has focused on Ontario and Quebec, when things turned out to be not so good in Ontario and Quebec because of, quite frankly, I think a real neglect of a lot of other parts of the country, there was nothing to fill it back up. I live in Ontario. I'm an Ontarian. I spend, because of my work, a fair bit of time in Alberta. It's wonderful for me to be able to see that dynamic.
Is there pulse out there? Any Liberal pulse in Alberta?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
And there are a huge number of people in Alberta who actually, the number of conversations I've had where people say, well, we all agree about a whole lot of issues, but the federal Liberal Party has not given them a reason to vote Liberal.
Okay, Greg, so tell me this. Your numbers here seem to suggest that for Ontario anyway, a little tweaking here and there, and this party's right back in the game. The question is, how much can you extrapolate from that experience to a national picture?
Well, we've done work nationally on this, and we looked very in a lot of detail during the NDP leadership to see the potential of the NDP to hold on to what they've got, and we've been tracking the last several election campaigns. I would say the first thing the Liberals need to understand is their problem. And I think that they've got 2 levels of problems. One is that the lower voter turnout helps the parties on the extremes who have a simpler message to mobilize their base, right? The Tories know where they come from in terms of fiscal issues and issues with the right. The NDP knows where they come from in terms of issues like redistribution. But those issues that work so well with their bases limit their abilities to grow to 40% or more in terms of the electorate. Meanwhile, the Liberals have a place in the middle. Their place comes from a couple of different perspectives. One is, unlike the Tories, most Liberals think that government is a good thing, right? Most Tories in their hearts think that government's potentially a problem, at least potentially, if not actually a problem. And the average Canadian and swing voters, right, when we had lots of turnout and the battle was over swing voters were looking for the government to lend them a hand. They didn't want it like the NDP. They didn't want to get the participation ribbon, right? They wanted a chance to get the blue ribbon, but they wanted a fair start. And that's what the Liberals offered. The offer said, the Liberals said, we're going to give you a fair start so you can get the blue ribbon, not the participation ribbon, and not a rigged race. And that was their position. That is open to them still.
Ian, I wonder if you agree with the Prime Minister, who seems to be heading us towards, excuse me, a two-party system. He would very much like to see Conservatives against New Democrats every election going forward, with the Liberals this insignificant little rump on the side. Do you see any evidence that Canadians want that kind of two-party system?
Actually, no, I don't, Steve, and I have a lot of respect for the Liberal brand. It's, you know, it's not so long ago that Pierre Trudeau was a pretty dominant figure in this country. Mr. Chrétien was a very successful Prime Minister over 3 terms until he and Paul Martin had that famous split, and then everything began to fall apart. But Mr. Harper's dream is to actually put the Liberals out of business. There's no doubt about that. And this new 338 House is going to make it easier for him to win another majority, because 27 of the new 30 seats are going to be west of the Ottawa River, in places like 905, in 604 on the Lower Mainland in Vancouver, and in 403 in Edmonton and Calgary. That's 27 out of 30 new seats in suburban Canada, which is prime Conservative territory.
The Liberal brand, Martha Hall Finley, if you look at the last, well, 2000, 2004, 2006, 2008, 2011, all those elections, it has gone straight down, the vote. Ian MacDonald says he's got respect for the Liberal brand and its resiliency. Where is the resiliency that you see? Because right now I see a decade of decline.
Well, that gives an opportunity to go back up, doesn't it, Steve?
Well, it may or may not.
There is, I think, countrywide a lot of respect for the brand. But I'll just, one of the points I wanted to make about the two-party system, because whatever the brands are, some of the things that have been so important in this country, some of the things we pride ourselves on, the Canada Health Care, the Health Act, pension plan, the flag, a number of those things, and I just happen to pick them from having been under a Liberal Prime Minister, that would be Pearson.
What a coincidence.
But I will also volunteer that under other successive governments, we've accomplished a lot in minority governments, because Canada historically has had the ability with multiple parties to compromise, to actually reach decisions that require some accommodation. I think that's a really important part of Canadian history. God forbid, there is no room for compromise in the United States right now. I think a two-party system would be a disaster. So I love to hear people like Ian say, no, that a three-party or multiple-party system is important.
Greg, do you see evidence of that, of a desire for two parties?
Well, I see. No, I do not see evidence of that.
Harper has a desire for two parties, right. Absolutely. Do Canadians? No, I don't think so.
I think that it's possible, because as turnout goes down, it's more and more likely we'll end up with effectively just two parties. But that's not necessarily where the electorate wants to go and where voters want to go. And there's opportunities for the Liberals. I mean, right now, there is no federal party, other than we'll see the Liberals maybe, but there's no federal party saying, you know what, the federal government has a job to do on healthcare. We're not just going to write checks to the provinces and say, go about your business. We're going to fight for the 5 principles of Medicare and maybe some new ones.
You don't think the NDP stands
The
for
NDP
that?
is not, because they've done a deal in Quebec. They're playing footsies with the separatists, and they're saying, you know what Quebec does in healthcare is their business, right? And it would be really interesting if a Liberal got out there and said, you know what, these are federal tax dollars, and we insist that if you take our money, you respect the rights, because every Canadian across this country should enjoy the same rights for healthcare. I'm not saying whether that's good, bad. You know, we should talk to Jeffrey Simpson about his book about that. But what I'm saying is that as a political argument, it's there to be made and nobody's making it.
Ian, you follow up on that, and then Martha.
Okay.
Sorry, Ian, you follow up on that. You looked like you had steam coming out of your ears there, so I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that.
Well, that's the classic division of powers debate in Section 91 and 92 to the B&A, Steve, and the Liberals have always been more of a strong central government type of party when they've been in a position to do something about healthcare, going all the way back to Tom Kent and Mr. Pearson with the creation of Medicare in the mid-1960s. But as for the Liberal brand, you know, being where they are today in 3rd place, so far, you know, down under the clock in the House of Commons, you can almost, it's hard to see them. Think of McDonald's in the fast food space being number 1 with a 40% share all those years. Think of McDonald's waking up one morning and being number 3, because all they were offering were Big Macs and people wanted salads. That's part of the Liberal problem, is what's on offer from them.
Martha Hall Finley.
And look at how many salads McDonald's is now selling. I mean, it is.
They've changed.
But there is that ability to
Adapt.
understand and to adapt. And I will say that when you talk about the need for a three-party system, if we only had the current Harper Conservatives and we only had Mulcair's NDP, I can guarantee I am not the only Canadian that would not have a political home. Neither one of those parties comes close to representing the amalgam of things that I want to see in terms of economic prosperity, economy, prosperity, but throw in the environment. I'll actually volunteer that our inability to do what we need to do on an environmental level has cost us. You know, you can talk about our inability to talk about an access to the West Coast properly, and not having done the environmental things properly may actually cost us economically. It's the economy, right? But there is no party that actually speaks to me and says, we know that prosperity is key. We know that prosperity has to come with a purpose. We know that we have to look after environmental concerns. We know we have to look after healthcare. We know we have to do all of these things. I'm proudly pro-choice when it comes to women's rights. I am proudly pro same-sex marriage in terms of social issues.
You were in a caucus where a lot of people didn't feel that way.
Where a lot of people were not. But this is the thing. The Liberal Party, in my humble opinion, will only be able to turn around if it confirms where it stands and says, we know that we're not going to be everything to everybody. We know that there are some people who are going to disagree. Stephen Harper knows that not everybody agrees with him, but this is critical for the future of the Liberal Party.
Ian, I got a minute left here, and obviously the three most important Liberal parties in the country, if I can put it this way, the federal one, the Quebec one, the Ontario one, are all coincidentally in the leadership business right now. They're all looking for new leaders. If those three Liberal parties pick the right three Liberal leaders, is this a party that's back in business?
Well, the federal Liberals, Mr. Trudeau needs a competitive race, and maybe Martha should jump in. I know she's already had this experience once before. In Quebec, the leader's probably going to be Philippe Couillard, who has been out of government for 4 years in the private practice of his medical practice. In Ontario, I don't really have a sense of who's going to be the next Liberal leader, but it certainly won't be Dwight Duncan carrying all those deficit numbers around.
Martha, you going to run for the federal leadership?
Steve, you know how passionate I am about this. Everybody knows I'm thinking about it. We'll see. We'll see.
You've paid off the debt from the last one, so that opens the door to this one.
We will see.
We will see. At least you didn't say, I have no plans, which is what Dalton McGuinty said, even though he did have plans.
That was Bill Davis who first said that.
You are absolutely right about that. Okay, Ian MacDonald, thanks so much for being there on the line from the nation's capital. And back here in Toronto, Martha Hall Finley from the School of Public Policy, University of Calgary, Greg Lyle, the Innovative Research Group, and thanks for those new numbers, Greg.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.